Hello, everyone. If you like what I'm doing here, please consider subscribing, liking, and commenting. It would really help the channel out quite a bit. Thank you very much.
Whatever became of The Shadow and Margo Lane. My name is Richard Lamparski, and here with me in the studio today is a lady by the name of Grace Matthews, who's better known to the radio audience as the lovely Margo Lane, faithful companion to Brett Morrison, The Shadow. Miss Matthews, do you sense another presence in this room today? There's an eerie quality.
You know, I do. I don't know whether it's the weather or something that's rather spooky out, but I really do.
It is. It's cold, and it's a good day to listen to The Shadow.
It really is. It really gives you the shudders when you think of it.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows.
Oh, Brett, that takes me back so many years.
Yeah.
Now, you're the only one who knows his true identity. Do you want to disclose who's here with us?
Yes, I'd love to. With us today is Mr. Brett Morrison.
Otherwise known as Lamont Cranston.
That's right. I'm sorry.
5 o'clock Shadow.
Yes.
It was on about 5 o'clock.
It was 5
5
o'clock
on
on Sundays, right.
Yes.
Yeah, I always think of that Sunday lineup. I would listen to Father Cogden. We were made to listen to that in our house. And then I listened to a program called Crime Does Not Pay.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And then The Shadow came on about 5.
Did the Green Hornet come on somewhere in there?
No, it wasn't
No.
I'm from Detroit.
Yes.
And it came on, you were on Mutual.
Yes.
The Shadow was on Mutual.
Right.
The Green Hornet was on ABC, as I remember, the Blue Network. And that was on the evenings.
Oh.
I think it was on one of the nights the Lone Ranger wasn't on at 7:30.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
I think I was listening to The Shadow, I was just thinking of this morning, when the announcer came in and said, we interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have just bombed Pearl Harbor.
Well, that was before I was doing The Shadow, because I was still in Chicago. I was doing Mr. First Nighter at the time.
I remember that was a Sunday. It was before I came to New
Yes.
York. I was in Canada. I'm a Canadian. And I was in Canada, and my husband and I heard this, and it was a Sunday afternoon.
It was, because I remember
Yes.
where I was. I was
Yes.
out horseback riding
Yes.
in Lincoln Park in
Were you?
Chicago.
Were you?
It would have been around that time, though, I think.
Yes,
would.
it was
Yes.
around
Yes, it would.
I was either listening to it or
2
waiting
o'clock
for
or
it.
somewhere around about Chicago time, somewhere around 2 o'clock, I believe.
That's right.
In the afternoon.
When did you start being the Shadow?
Well, this is very interesting. Would you like to hear how?
Please.
Well, I was doing Mr. First Nighter, which was also a Mutual show out of Chicago.
Were you the title role?
Yes, I was Mr. First Nighter.
You were the fellow who always managed to get a cab and
Yes,
swear.
yes.
I could never understand that.
I never could either. After I got to New York, I could never figure it out either. But it used to come on right after The Shadow. The Shadow came on, and then First Nighter came on out of Chicago. So I always used to hear the tail end of The Shadow, the closing signature, the weed of crime bears bitter fruit, crime does not pay, while we're getting our last-minute corrections and waiting to go on the air. And then the war, of course, broke out, and, of course, everything came to a dead stop as far as radio and all was concerned. I went into special service. And when I got out of the Army, I came on to New York because I was stationed in Boston, First Service Command. And one of the first, I got a call. I was doing a show called The Falcon, which was about the first show I got here in New York. Just playing characters on it. It wasn't a title role. And I got a call for an audition. I didn't know what it was for. It was Rutherford and Rhyme, was the advertising agency. And they just called me for an audition, and I was supposed to be there, I don't know, say 1 o'clock or something like that. Not later than 1 o'clock. They were losing the studio at 1 o'clock. And I was on the air at the Falcon, or I'm not sure about the time of the audition, but anyway, right up practically to the last minute. So by the time I got there, it was about 4 minutes to the hour when they were going to lose the studio. So I ran in and they just said, well, there isn't time to do anything. Just read this. It's the opening and closing signatures, and just read it. And it was the opening and closing signature of The Shadow. And I just read it the way I always remembered it and left, and that was that. And I thought, well, forget it. And a couple days later, I got a call saying, you're it.
Isn't that interesting?
So that was the...
How long were you it?
About 13 years, I think, roughly.
Is it true that...
44 until... Well, Orson Welles was the first one to do the shadow when he became an integral part of the story itself. Before that, there were 2 or 3 when the shadow was merely sort of a host. He was like Raymond of Inner Sanctum. He never appeared in the story, the body of the story, but he was merely the host who presented the thing. They set up the framework, and then they had some sort of a cops and robbers thing.
Now, wasn't Bill Johnstone one of those?
Bill Johnstone preceded me. Orson Welles was before Bill Johnstone.
I see.
And before him, I think Mr. Reddick was one of the original shadows before he became part of the story. Bobby Reddick's father.
Frank
Reddick.
Yes.
And I don't know who else might have done it that particular time. But in the 30s, I know, when we were doing First Nighter, I think this was... I'm not sure then whether that was Orson Welles or whether that was Bill Johnstone. But I think I did it from 1944 until... We went off when, in 52?
Well, I left it
No,
in...
we went...
I left it in 49.
I think we went later than that.
About a year or so, didn't you? Yes.
No, it was longer than that.
Was it longer than that?
Yes. I can't remember now when we did our last broadcast. But I've figured it out once, and I know I was on, I think, close to 13 years. I know I did it longer than anyone else.
Well, now tell us, what evil did lurk in the heart of man? I have an idea.
The wages of sin are time and a half, I guess.
May I tell a story on myself?
Please.
You know, sometimes the scripts were so complicated that when I finished, I wasn't really sure, what had happened, actually. Not always, but occasionally, weren't they, Brett? And I'd go home, and I'd still be worrying about it. And, of course, my husband was at home, and he was expected to listen, but he was also a baseball fan, you see, so he used to switch between the shadow and the baseball every Sunday. And I would come home and say, can you please tell me what happened in that plot? And, of course, then he would have to fake like mad, pretending he'd heard the whole thing.
Well, I'll tell you a story. I was brought up by my grandmother, and she was very permissive with me about radio. She let me listen to anything. I mean, a lot of kids couldn't because they thought it would scare them or there was something wrong with it. But the one show that she very reluctant to have me listen to was The Shadow. And let me tell you why. Because in the introduction, your introduction,
yes.
Margo Lane,
yes.
she always said, what does that mean by faithful companion?
Well, I've wondered about that many times myself. We sort of cavorted all over the world,
I know.
and had this strange relationship.
I know. It's absolutely true.
And there was an odd sound to the way they said, faithful companion.
I know.
Something purple.
Something very purple.
I rather doubt it, though, in those days on radio. They were very careful.
It was great fun. We did it in the theater. We did it in the Longacre Theater.
Did you have an audience?
Yes. There was a short period when we went into a studio because I was about to have a daughter. And so do you remember when we moved into the studio?
Yes.
Well, that little baby, which forced us into a studio, was just sent off to college today. So
oh, dear.
It's kind of a long time ago.
Are any of your children impressed with the fact that you were Margo Lane?
Not really. I mean, they've never heard of it,
Really?
Well,
did you hear about it?
Well, they were using some of the recordings last year, but I don't think our children ever heard them.
Will they listen tonight?
Pardon?
Will they be hearing this program tonight?
I don't think so. What tonight?
When we're on. Mm-hmm.
Well, if I could let them know, they'd be delighted.
Oh, sure, I'll let you know.
Well, wonderful.
We'll give them an idea of what it sounded like when it began. So if our engineer is ready, he'll cue something up I have as a surprise for you. Are we all ready?
what evil lurks in the hearts of men. The shadow,
How long since you've heard that?
Do you recognize the organist, by the way? We had three. Remember, there's Elsie Thompson, Rosario, and Charlie Paul. I think that's Charlie Paul. I remember that strange sort of glissando thing.
Yes, I think it is, too.
Yes.
Mm.
They had a real eerie quality.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, really hooked you.
Yes.
The Sanson's a Spinning Wheel. That's the theme song.
Yes, it was.
Yes.
I noticed on the album today.
Yes.
I didn't know what the music was.
And people have always asked me, what is the theme of that? What is the theme of that?
Brett, have you heard any of the, the replays at all?
I have heard a couple of them. I had to listen to some of them when I had the time, mainly to establish who was playing in them. When
I remember they did that. Mm.
For purposes of residual payment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing. I couldn't recognize women particularly very easily, and some of the men were kind of difficult because we did so much doubling. That is, some of the other characters would play 2 and 3 parts, and it was often kind of hard to figure out who did what. And but I remember the first time when this all started, I received a tape from Chicago Mutual, someone there. On staff.
Oh, did you?
They had started to play these, and he said, I'm sure that's Brett Morrison. They were supposed to be programs that were done in Australia for some strange reason. At least this was the story we were given. And then so they sent the tape on for me to, and after asked me to listen to it and see if it was me and if I recognized anybody else. And it just so happened on that particular program I could identify everybody.
Really?
Yes.
Were you usually live?
We were live up until, I guess, about the time that... Did we ever go back in the theater after the
Andrea?
Yeah.
Yes. We did. For a while, Brett.
Then we went to, I think it was probably for another year at the most, and then we went into the studio and we recorded on a Tuesday.
Yes.
Which gave us our weekends. That was the only problem with this show, is that having to perform live on Sundays, it just killed the weekend for everybody.
It made mine.
I will never forget the beautiful lunches Brett used to bring for the whole cast, because we'd have to go in around, 11 o'clock?
Yes.
And we wouldn't be finished till 5:30. And you'd sometimes get a break, but late in the afternoon, to get something to eat. Brett would arrive with this gorgeous repast, hot, for the whole cast. It was, just unbelievable.
I
think
all
so
radio people had a awfully good time now, didn't they?
Oh, marvelous time.
All the people I talked to from radio, they really loved it.
You see, everybody misses that companionship now. The industry is just, you never see scattered all over the place.
The main thing, I think, with radio, and I think the saddest part of radio was that this gave people a chance to use their imaginations. In other words, the people looked the way you wanted them to look. The places looked the way you imagined them. And now with television, it's a fait accompli. I mean, you accept it, and if you don't like it, you turn it off and go to something else. But that was the beauty of radio. It helped to stimulate the imagination. And in comparison, now they sound very corny when you listen to some of these old shows, because we've made such tremendous strides technically and also performance-wise. In radio, everything had to be spelled out in large capital letters so that, I've got you covered with this gun, so that it was clear to the audience what was happening. And which makes it seem kind of corny. But that was the beauty of radio, and that's the thing that I think is missing in our entertainment today.
Well, as corny as they may seem now, though, radio had a quality, for me, that television never has had. No matter how good it is, I was able to escape in a radio program.
But I think for that
Yes,
very reason.
I think
I can't
so.
with television.
Because
No.
you're using
No.
your imagination.
Yeah.
You become completely enthralled.
Right. Because it created a completely new world.
And the locations, well, you, as
I
you say,
know.
we used to be all over the world.
Yes.
Yes.
Istanbul, that one week,
Yes.
Port-au-Prince, the next.
Oh, it was very glamorous.
I had unlimited means, I'm
Oh, of
sure.
course.
Was there ever any one or maybe more terrible mistakes made during a live broadcast?
You know, I was coming in on the train this morning. I was trying to think if there were any catastrophes on the Shadow. And I couldn't think of
I
any.
don't remember any, except
Isn't that dull?
the usual things of the guns not going off, you know, when they're supposed to, and people saying, well, on second thought, I'm going to stab you to death. Like
Yes.
that. Then the guns
Yes.
usually go off.
Wasn't that the famous Don Amici story?
I think it's probably happened on every radio
I've
show
heard a few
because
times.
Yes.
your sound effects department was always separate, you know, from the actor, and they had to be queued up either by record or live shot, and sometimes you had as many as 2 and 3 sound men working. And it was very easy for a mishap, especially if it was a prop that was a live prop, you know, and it could misfire or not go off. This has happened to me in the theater, too.
Sure.
I used to read Radio Life magazine. I think that was the name of it. Wasn't that the magazine for radio fans? Radio Life. I'm sure it was.
Radio Mirror?
Radio Mirror.
Radio
That's right.
Mirror,
Radio
yes.
Mirror. And sometimes they would have an article in about how sound effects were done.
Yes.
And that was very interesting
Yes.
to me as a radio fan.
Well, it
They used
fascinated
cellophane for
the
fire.
it fascinated the audience.
Oh,
who used to have it.
yes.
I think they had more of a kick watching the sound effects department than they did the.
Well, it was really an art, though.
Oh yes,
Because, you know, they
and still is for that.
Yes.
For that matter.
Of course, we didn't have the problem either that, like, a show like Big Town did, which had a repeat. And they would, say, do the show at 8:30 and then come back at 12, and actors would go home to have a nap, you know, and fall asleep.
Walter Grisey, which was the name we were trying to think of before, who played...
That's right. That's right.
He played Steve Wilson.
Yes.
He told me that there was several instances
Yes.
like that, and a couple of times when they would go over to, maybe it was Hurley's in those days, I don't know, and have a few snorts.
Yes.
And the program would be quite a bit different. You heard on the West Coast later.
I've often wandered off on something like that, and have gone to a movie or something, and
Yes.
right in the middle of the picture, this suddenly come over me that I was due in the studio like an hour and a half ago. It's the most horrible feeling in the world, you know.
But, of course, the Shadow didn't do a repeat, so that
we only have
was great.
What were some of your sponsors? Do you remember?
Blue Coal.
Blue
mostly.
Coal was
That's the
main.
one I remember.
Yeah.
Well, that was the main sponsor, I think, for the majority of the time on the air. Well, I think altogether the Shadow was on the air close to some 20 years from its inception, and 20 or maybe more. And I would say that about at least 15 to 18 years, Blue Coal was the sponsor. And it wasn't until we started to tape the show, actually, that we had multiple sponsors. At the beginning of television, the advent of television was the decline. Of course, they sold radio short immediately, which was a big mistake, and they realized it later. But from the advent of television, I mean, it sort of began going downhill. We had multiple sponsors, and then they kept changing, and every year there'd be 1 or 2 new sponsors, and this was...
Around the end, I remember you had local sponsors because in Detroit, which was where I was listening to it, I guess in the late 40s, the one, I don't know why I remember this, but you were brought to us by Krajenki Buick. Hard to spell, but easy to deal with. At 2907 Joseph Campo Avenue in the heart of Hamtramck. I have total recall.
You certainly do. Well, didn't Addison come into it? That was a sort of a hitchhike, wasn't it? You remember that Don...
I don't remember. We just seemed to have so many of them toward the end.
No, I meant during the Blue Coal. Do you remember?
Oh, yes. Well, there were some sort of hitchhikes.
Yes.
Thing, cow catchers or trailers, as they would call them.
I'm going to do some more radio people. In fact, just before I came up to the studio, I was talking to Santos Ortega.
And he Commissioner Weston.
Yes.
Well, he was also the Fat Man.
Yes.
Yes, and he was also a running character for many years on Big Sister. You know, he was Dr. Carville, who was, you know, Ruth Wayne Big Sister's closest confidant.
And we didn't say that you are Big Sister.
Oh, well.
No, we didn't.
No, that's right, we didn't.
You might come back again sometime and we'll do a Big Sister show.
All right, good, I'd love to.
Well, anyway, he put me in touch with John Gibson, who was Archie on The Fat Man.
Oh, yes, yes.
Nero Wolfe.
No, Nero Wolfe was different, because Nero Wolfe was the Fat Man.
Well, Archie was a Nero Wolfe, and he did Nero Wolfe, too.
Did he?
Yeah. Are you sure that No, the Fat Man was, that was somebody else. It was Nero Wolfe that he did.
Oh.
It was not the Fat Man. The Fat Man was Jack somebody, Jack Smart, yes.
It's
Jack Smart was a very heavy man himself,
yes.
and he's since passed away.
Is Santos Ortega?
No, Santos Ortega's quite slender, or was the last time I saw him.
But I tell you now, Johnny Gibson had a wonderful part on Casey.
Crime photographer.
Crime photographer.
That was Stott Cotsworth,
That was
wasn't
Stott Cotsworth, yes.
He's a marvelous actor. I was on a board with him after about a year ago.
Oh, were you?
Yes, the George Heller Memorial Foundation.
It was that old man I played on Big Sister, remember?
Oh, yes. You were so rich, weren't you? Yes.
I was about 82.
Yeah.
I just went on and on like this for years.
You know, the shadow was a source of great speculation among boys in school when I was going to school of all the things we would do if we were invisible.
Oh, really?
I can't go into a lot of them on the air because it was about the age boys started to get interested in girls. But that was a game we would play by the hour.
Well, apropos of that, you know, this is quite amazing, but you'd be surprised how many adults actually thought that Lamont Cranston was a true character who had the power to make himself invisible. Because toward the end of the program, or somewhere around, I think, when we were in Korea, we would receive letters. I'd receive letters, people saying, we think it's a crime that you're keeping the shadow here when he could be spying for our country, you know, against...
Really?
Oh, yes. Yes, it's really fantastic. I had no idea
Isn't that amazing?
that I've seen this happen, identity happen in daytime radio, you know, with characters. They seem to lose fact that these people are, you know, they think they actually exist, and it's I don't know how they correlate the time element that at a certain time they're able to eavesdrop on their lives.
Well, Ma Perkins told me that when her daughter Evie got married on the program, they were flooded with wedding gifts.
Oh, yes.
There were
Flooded.
thousands,
Yes.
I think.
Yes. She said, and then when the baby came, they had bassinets and quilts and blankets. And one woman called her from the Midwest, long distance, to New York, right before they went on the air one day, to find out if the wedding was going to be delayed, because she had some important engagement to make, and she would have to break it if Evie was not going to be married that day, because they kept delaying the wedding.
My goodness.
That's the power, you see, you folks have.
Yes, it is. It's extraordinary.
The same token, they would be frying an egg for like 2 months. You know, a scene would never progress beyond that particular sequence.
Were your audiences mostly adult in the studio?
I think so. The Shadow was really a universal show. I mean, it appealed to all ages. I mean, it was not a kid's show, and it was not an adult show. It was sort of everybody enjoyed it. From grandparents on down to
Yes, I would think the audience was about 3/4 adult, wasn't it?
I would say so. Yeah, pretty much. So.
I'm going to be talking to a man tomorrow, at least recording a program with him, who I think was on Mutual for many years, a very famous newscaster by the name of Quincy Howe. Remember that name from radio?
Very well.
Yes.
Very well, yes.
Yeah, when he called me the other day, as soon as he said, Mr. Van Parsky, this is, the voice immediately.
Yes.
He had what they used to call a radio voice.
Yes.
Yes.
Very, very distinctive. Well, now, you must tell me now, what are you all doing now?
Well, Brett, you start.
Well, for about the past almost 10 years, I have been in a completely new profession, new for me, that is, of dubbing foreign films into English as a writer, director, and actor. And there are only about a half a dozen of us in the country that do this kind of work. It's very highly specialized. And
could you tell us some of the films, recent ones you've done?
Well, I'm trying to think. I don't know when some of these things are really. I see them on television once in a while, although a lot of them are dubbed in Europe, and rather badly, I must say. But there's a series of sort of Hercules pictures that are on now, some of which we did, that is playing on television at the present time. I did a section of The Hill, this English picture, which was released recently.
Sean Connery.
The Sean Connery thing, because of the English accent. Some of the North Country and some of the others were rather thick and was hard for the people to understand, and I had to match voices on this and redo several reels of the picture to try to clarify it, lighten up on the accent a little bit.
Are you ever asked to dub laughs?
Oh,
your famous laugh?
No, not that. I don't know. We do many pictures. I do the studio that I work for primarily, which is Titan. We must turn out about some 40 pictures a year, I would say.
That's
we
a lot.
8.5. We do most of the important pictures that have to be done. And I'm trying to think of some of the names. The names are changed. That's the trouble. The only reason why I can't recall some of them, because the names that we get when we're working on them and what they're finally released are two entirely different things. Sometimes happens. Right at the present time, I'm working on a picture called Wake Up and Kill, which is a true story of Luciano Nutri, an Italian gangster, a young gangster, which is rather an exciting picture. I think it's MGM release, if I'm not mistaken. And let me think what else was done recently. I did a picture called High Infidelity. I don't think that's been released as yet. And did The Great Wall, which played out in our area. A lot of these played in drive-in theaters, and they're played in smaller communities, because with the exception of New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and some of your more urban cities, where they have a population that will go to an art theater or patronize an art theater and will see a picture in subtitle or in the original language. They won't sit still for it out in the sticks.
No.
So these pictures have to be dubbed. And then also Hollywood is not turning out as many pictures as they used to, and television is eating them up so rapidly that we're forced to try to get the better pictures from Europe and to dub them into English so that we can just sort of feed this huge maw that keeps devouring motion pictures.
Miss Matthews, what are you up to?
Well, I've had kind of a fascinating time since the demise of the Shadow. My husband, who's an actor too, Court Benson, and I and our family all moved to England to work. And we were there living in London for 3 years. And I worked in theater. I did a play. I did a lot of television there. My husband did a lot of films and television. And we just had a, marvelous time. We are Canadians, so that we can work there as well as work here. We're terribly fortunate, that we have this sort of dual thing that allows us to work.
Yeah, because if you're not, you're dead.
You're dead. You're dead.
I tried it, and it's very
did
difficult.
You really?
Yeah, they said don't bother.
Yes, it is very difficult.
And I had some very important people trying to pull strings.
Yes.
And they said it really cannot be done.
No. Well, we were lucky, and we had a really wonderful time. And since I've been back, I've been doing quite a bit of daytime television.
Well, unfortunately, our time is up. Visiting with me today has been Miss Grace Matthews, better known as Margo Lane, the faithful companion of the Shadow, and her faithful companion, Mr. Brett Morrison. Mom Cranston was here. It was lots of fun. Next week, somebody else from the Sunday afternoon Mutual lineup. I think he was on Mutual also. He was on many networks. The Father Coglan movement. Father Coglan won't give an interview, and he's retired now, so I have one of his ardent supporters who feels exactly the same. So if you tune in again next week at the same time, you'll find out whatever became of the Father Coglan movement. I think we have just enough time to hear that Shadow love theme once again. Here we go. Love theme from the Shadow.